fundamentally, the high performer's journey normally starts out when they're very young with a feeling of deep pain or a feeling of deep insignificance. And so what ends up happening is they end up going on this big journey where they are after success, but not really clear as to why they're after it. It's just sort of insatiable drive that they can't quite put their finger on. The chokehold of your business is your personal psychology. We have built cultures and ways of living that are actually out of alignment with our own intrinsic wiring. And I achieved all this stuff, but I had no one to share it with, and in the end it wasn't really worth much anymore. And so when you're looking out at the world, ask yourself what moves you, what breaks your heart, what hurts you to see that where people are suffering. Because often what happens is the more successful they get, the more miserable they become, but the more the world rewards them. It's fundamentally because they are living a life that is misaligned in some way. All of these things are interconnected. We are yearning to feel connected to something bigger than just us. There's no greater honor than helping somebody become a more effective version of themselves in a way that is meaningful to them.
Welcome to the Superhuman Blueprint Podcast.
Welcome to the Superhuman Blueprint Podcast. I am Drew Griesel from Primal Wellness Coaching. As always, folks, if you like this show, please remember to subscribe, hit that like button, leave us a comment, leave us a review, leave us a rating, and share this episode from anyone that you think could find it helpful. And speaking of this episode, today I am talking to Max Stevens. Max is a high-performance coach, speaker, and author of the upcoming book, What the Fuck Do You Really Want? Doesn't get much better than that, folks. Max, he works with driven executives, he works with entrepreneurs, with top performers, with people who have hit the usual success milestones, but still feel something is missing. So what Max does is he cuts through the BS of traditional self-help and then helps people uncover what really matters. So his work blends philosophy, psychology, and practical tools to guide clients towards purpose and clarity and self-mastery. I am very interested to have this conversation. Max Stevens, welcome to the Superhuman Blueprint Podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. Looking forward to it.
I'm excited to have you here. And so you're a coach. You coach high performers, high achievers. And when I first came across you, I thought it'd be really interesting to chat because my niche that I work in within the wellness space is people that work, you know, they're professionals, right? They're working hard, they're working every day, and they kind of lose track of their physical health. So you're kind of on a parallel journey in how you coach people. It's a different focal point, but kind of a similar view, right? That people in their pursuit of success, they kind of lose sight of certain things. So I'm excited to talk to you about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, the definition of the word health is a very, very interesting one. So I'm looking forward to unpacking that with you as well.
Yeah, and my perspective of that definition has definitely evolved in the years that I've been sort of digging in on this space.
Yeah, no, cool.
So I'm just going to ask you, so what does it mean to you to be a high performer? So you work with high performers, right? So what is a high performer?
So there's a lot of like positive language that is associated with high performance. And that hasn't been my experience in working with people. So, I wrote this research article years ago called The Tragic Archetype of the High Performer. And so fundamentally, the high performer's journey normally starts out when they're very young with a feeling of deep pain or a feeling of deep insignificance. And so what ends up happening is they internalize that belief from a very, very early age and work very, very hard to sort of disconfirm or seek contrary evidence to that initial belief that they internalize. And so what ends up happening is they end up going on this big journey where they are after success, but not really clear as to why they're after it. It's just this sort of insatiable drive that they can't quite put their finger on. And normally what ends up happening is because they are sort of allergic to being by themselves. What ends up happening is that over time they run into things like burnout, they run into things like strained relationships, they run into things like strained marriages, they run into health problems, etc., etc. And it's normally like one of two things that gets the high performer to reassess. It's normally either like a major health crisis, which, you know, you and I can talk at length about, or it's a divorce and like a breakdown of the family unit. And so what normally ends up happening on the other side of that is that the high performer is then forced into a position where they have to reassess what's sort of important to them, and they normally face a crossroads where they have to turn inside and realize that a big part of the reason that they were pursuing this in the first place was that their business or pursuit of high performance was a vehicle to sort of heal themselves, but it didn't work. And so my work fundamentally is about integrating those experiences in the first place, which counterintuitively actually ends up making the high performer more successful than ever before. But it now no longer is born from a place of self-healing.
And speaking of high achievers experiencing burnout, folks, I am excited to announce the release of my flagship program, The Superhuman Blueprint, is now available online, so anyone can do this. It used to have to be that you would be in person with me to be able to do this program. Now anyone can do it. And this relates very much to what Max and I are talking about today, because this is really, I created this for people that are working that 9 to 5, that are working hard, that are pushing it, that are creating success at the cost of their own health and wellness. This program is designed for people that don't have time for a program. So it's built in a way that fits into any schedule. So go to primalwellnesscoaching.com, check it out. I'm going to give listeners of this show 10% off with the code podcast. Okay, go to primalwellnesscoaching.com, use code podcast to get 10% off the Superhuman Blueprint. This is a 10-week wellness transformation program. I'm talking about getting your energy back. I'm talking about losing weight. I'm talking about having focus and clarity. I'm talking about having better relationships and happiness and all the things that come with improving your health. So check it out. primalwellnesscoaching.com. Use code podcast for 10% off. All right, let's get back to my chat with Max. So how does someone end up with you? And by that, I mean, okay, I'm working hard. I'm a successful person. I've achieved, let's just say the common definition of success, right? I'm making a lot of money. I have, I've built my brand, my reputation. I know something's missing, but I don't really know what. So how do your clients find you? How do they realize something's missing and then end up with a coach like yourself?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So in some cases, it's a sell them what they want, give them what they need sort of dynamic. But by and large, there's a lot of people and a lot of coaches, certainly in Australia. I'm not sure if it's the same in the United States, but because the barrier to entry is so low, the barrier to retain really high quality clients is really high. Is normally what will happen is a current client will introduce me to somebody, and that person will say, look, I've had a coach before, it didn't really work, I'm a bit skeptical about the whole space. And but my client will sort of come in and back me and say, no, I've worked with Max for the last few years. It's been fabulous. You really, really have to meet him. They go, all right, fine, I'll give it a try. And so normally that's like the pathway by which I meet new clients. But in terms of what sort of leads them to realizing that they might benefit from working with somebody like me is normally that there's like a chokehold within their business, which is often diagnosed as an external problem. Whereas like the thing that I often say is that the chokehold of your business is your personal psychology. And so by and large, just notice that all business owners who are in your industry don't have the exact problems that you have. So that sort of speaks to the idea that there's something about you that is contributing to these problems being there. And so that then moves me into deeper conversations about potential work together. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, that's really interesting. And for myself with my wellness transformation that I work with the kind of the professional space as well, a lot of it is just people, and I started out in fitness, right? So with fitness and kind of where I'm at, people generally start with, I don't look good, right? I've been putting on weight, or I just I don't look good anymore. And then with that comes usually a realization that I don't feel good. And then with I don't feel good is like this whole sort of domino effect of other things that all of a sudden become apparent are not ideal, right? Maybe they have what they want, they check certain boxes, but then there are all these other boxes they've been kind of ignoring that they realize they have not checked. And a lot of that is around health, and in particular mental health. And that's kind of where I think there's like a really interesting service that you provide, right? Because, there's a whole mental health aspect of finding success that is almost like contrary to what people might think, right? You've found the traditional version of success, and yet you've lost some things along the way.
Yeah, I would argue that the pursuit of individualistic material success is largely a mimetic desire. So what I mean by mimetic is like it's a desire that we inherit. It's not really like intrinsically biologically wired. So I guess what I mean by that is if we look throughout human history, for tens, if not hundreds, it's debated when sort of human beings came to be. But even if we go on the shorter side, tens of thousands of years, like our ancestors and everybody's ancestors fundamentally lived in tribes in the forest. And so my quote unquote success was predicated upon the contribution that I made to said tribe. Did you go and get the berries? Did you go and hunt the animal? Did you go and catch the fish? And if I achieved that goal, I would bring the fish, berries, or animal back to the tribe, and I would be celebrated, right? And so the challenge is, by and large, is that now in 2025, we have built cultures and ways of living that are actually out of alignment with our own intrinsic wiring. And so that's why, like the classic story of, I achieved all this stuff, but I had no one to share it with. And in the end, it wasn't really worth much anymore. Because you've evolved from living in tribes of anywhere from 20 to 100 people, where you would come back and you would share it with them. And when you don't have that, you're misaligned with your own intrinsic nature, right? Whereas everybody knows, I would argue as close to everybody is reasonable to use the word. Everybody knows that if you do achieve something and then you have people to share it with, it amplifies that feeling. And the reason why it amplifies that feeling is that's your intrinsic nature. That's your biological wiring. It's like one of the things that I talk about. It's one of the things that I talk about at length in the book. Is like one of the challenges that we have within particularly contemporary Western culture is we have this idea that but we're all just individuals, man. And, things that work for you might not work for me, and everyone's different, and, blah, blah, blah. That's not true. That is not true. If you look at any other species, you take, what's an example? Dogs. Dogs are dogs. They might have different temperaments. They might have different dispositions. They might have different, tastes in certain things or whatever, but they're all still dogs. And so dogs have dog needs, and they need walk, they need play, they need affection, they need food. You deny any dog, no matter their disposition, personality, or preferences, the dog will suffer. And the human animal is exactly the same. We are wired fundamentally for contribution, for community, for connection. These are the things that we are wired for. And yet we've built these lives that are we've built cultures, I should say, that are fundamentally disconnected from this. And so what ends up happening is that we go on this journey that is out of alignment with our own evolutionary biology, and then wonder why we're not happy. And I go, well, you're not, you're pursuing the wrong things here. And so that's I would argue that explains a vast majority of the misery and suffering of high performance.
Yeah, well, throw things like social media into the mix, and it's like you can feel like you're a part of something, but you're on the outside looking in, and you may not like what you see in there, and you may not like what you see looking back at you. So you mentioned your book. So speaking of your book, so I think by the time this podcast is published, your book will actually be available. So tell us about the book. Tell us what it's called.
Yeah, sure. So the book is called What the Fuck Do You Really Want? It is the no-nonsense guide to finding your purpose. And so the book, maybe am I allowed to swear on your show, Drew?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so
no problem.
So the first line of the book, is that I fucking hate self-help books, and I do. And so the thing that originally what I tried to do with the book was to map out all the patterns that I observed within high performance and what they get stuck on, and why they get stuck there, and what they're actually saying, what they're actually meaning when they're saying certain things, and all that sort of stuff. And so I went through this process of documenting all these patterns, and it ended up being like an 80,000 word, 500-page manuscript. And I realized that on the other side of documenting all these patterns and going into the neuroscience of how their brains work and all this sort of stuff, is I realized, as I said, no one cares, Max. No one cares. The only person who cares about this is you. And so what I did
it's hard to come to that point, huh?
Well, what I did,
you put so much work into it.
Yeah, I mean, that was fine. That was fine. But what I fundamentally did was I just stripped it down to its absolute bare bones, where I actually take where rather than it being about the documentation of the patterns, I actually take the reader on the journey that I take clients on. And so the reader can actually walk, and it's filled with the book is like jam-packed with the exercises to help them find their purpose, and it's like very, very short, a couple 100 pages long, very easy to read. It's written in a super conversational manner. I'm talking with the reader. I have 3 client stories, 2 of which were roaring successes, and the third is the worst outcome I've gotten in my career by a long way. So I wrote in there around like what happens when we don't take up this journey, and sort of documented what happened for this particular person as well. And so, yeah, that was basically my effort in some ways to be able to reach more people, because so I would imagine in some ways, Drew, similar to you, where the chokehold of your business is more or less your time. And so in this way, more people can take up that journey if they choose to.
Yeah, exactly. The flagship program that I've historically only run my in-person clients through, I've now made available through an online program because of that reason, right? I want more people to have access to what I have to give.
Right.
So we've kind of challenged what the traditional definition of success is. Yep. So for you, when you're looking at kind of like the end goal of a client of yours, what is success? What does it look like to be successful in helping them along their journey?
Yeah, great question. So once the high performer reaches their roadblock where they admit to themselves that I'm not happy, there are 3 like major pillars that we can lean on, that allow us to really, really build a life that is really ours. And I guess what I mean by that is that often I find, like, coaching 101 will tell us that whatever somebody brings to coaching is not the problem. It's always just like the symptom of something else. And I imagine in some ways it would be similar in your space, right? So, for example, let's say an executive comes to me, a CEO comes to me, and they say, Max, I'd love to work with you to double the size of the revenue in the business. And then, like, the first question out of my mouth is normally like, okay, why do you want that? So you could have asked me for anything. You could have brought anything to the work, but this is the thing that you wanted to bring. Why this? And they'll say, so I can prove to all those people who said that I couldn't do it that I can. And I'll say, well, don't you think a better use of our time is just to forgive those people, because then you wouldn't have to do this at all. And so the idea is, like, if we're really going to build a life that is meaningful, which is sort of our shared mission, right? Is we both do that in different ways. Is we want to make sure that we're building it on firm psychological and firm epistemic ground. And so there's 3 things that we need to do that. So number one is what I call radical honesty. So, like, people, by and large, I find they are very loose with their language in terms of what they want. And so what I mean by that is they'll say, Max, I care too much about what other people think, and I'd really love to not care what anyone thinks and just do what I want. And I go, okay, let me stop you. Like, do you really want to not care what anybody thinks? Like, is that really what you want? And they'll go, well, not exactly. No. So it's like, there's like this passing out that goes on that's around, like, and then if I ask them, tell me about where you'd like to be in 5 years, just answers that I get, I just go, that's not you talking. Like, that's just platitudes. Like, you haven't really thought about this very deeply. And so radical honesty is a really good place to start. And self-honesty with ourselves, if we're trying to answer any sort of question around what's the sort of life that I want to live. The second piece is around forgiveness. So before we start moving forwards into this next chapter, let's make sure that there's nothing that we're bringing with us from old chapters, right? And so the challenge with forgiveness, and one of the reasons why it's such a powerful idea, is because without forgiveness, what ends up happening is we quite literally have blind spots within our epistemology. We run into things that we can't see. So, for example, like that executive or CEO that I was just referring to, who said, so I can prove to all those people that that said I couldn't do it, that I can. He is now acting out. He is now acting out of an experience, right? Rather than dealing with his real feelings about that experience. And so what we want to do is be really cleansing in our sort of perception, so we're not bringing anything with us. And then the third is an awareness of your mortality. So be as radically honest as you can. Forgive as many people as you can. Forgive yourself also. And then number 3 is realize that you are going to die. Absolutely. Like, yes or yes. And so understanding that, like, there is no real safe road. There is no real safe path, because all the paths that people take that are safe lead to the exact same place that the paths that people take that are unsafe or higher risk or whatever. And so between these 3 ideas, you know, now we're in a good place to build to build a life that is really ours, because now I'm not carrying things from my past. I am being radically honest, and I know that my time is finite. And so where we sort of move from there, right, in terms of like, okay, that's all well and good, but how do we actually move forward, right? So the pathway to moving forward is the place to start with is we start with you, in that we start with your gifts. So your gifts are the things. Well, let me take a step back. One of the challenges and etymological problems that we have, in my view at least, when we use that word gifts, is we often associate gifts with, like, these are things that come really easy to me that, you know, the universe has sort of bestowed upon me, if you like.
Sure.
And I would argue that that's nonsense. I would argue that your gifts are not actually meant for you. Your gifts are meant to come through you. They're for somebody else.
Okay.
So your gifts are actually supposed to be given to somebody else through you, right? And so your gifts are not for you. And so we start out with your gifts. The danger in some ways with your gifts is that because they often come very easily, we often dismiss them. And so one of the things that I have people do in the book is go and ask 10 people that you trust, you know, what your gifts are, and they'll tell you. And so once we've got those identified, now we get our attention off of ourselves and we turn outwards to the world, and we ask ourselves, who is it that I can serve with these gifts, right? And so I'm fundamentally walking people through, like, almost like a career finding exploration, but I'm trying to do it with language that sings a lot deeper. That sings a lot deeper than just, like, work out what your ideal niche is in the market. And so when you're sort of looking out at the world, ask yourself, what moves you, what breaks your heart, what hurts you to see that where people are suffering, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Work out where you can serve using your gifts. And then the third piece is we need a place to start. And so this is a really common trap that a lot of people fall into, is they sit in their room waiting for the perfect plan, rather than just starting and then trusting that those feedback loops will start to come in. And as they start to come in, their understanding of their gifts, and also the people that they want to serve with those gifts, will become clearer as well. And so I would intuit in some ways it would not be too dissimilar from the health and wellness space, whereby it's like, just do these things for the next week. You know, don't worry about the fact that you're 20 kilos overweight. Don't worry about the fact that, you know, whatever. Right? Let's just start here, and don't set the expectation that you'll get any further than here for now. And so that sort of compounds into, you know, lots of, you know, other things, right? And so that's exactly where we get to. So we get there by being radically honest, forgiving people in our history and ourselves, understanding that our time here is finite, turning inward and realizing what my gifts are, turning outward and realize what moves me about the world and where I can use my gifts to serve, and then just starting to do that, just finding a place to start and beginning. And that, between those sort of 6 anchors, you know, we're now in a good place to sort of really build a life that is really ours.
And can you share some examples? You know, you don't have to name names or anything, but just like of some of your success stories when people have figured out what their gifts are and then use those to, I guess we'll just say, put good forth into the world. Like what have you seen them do?
Yeah, absolutely. So like one of the stories that I talked a little bit about in the book, who this woman has been arbitrarily named as Vanessa. Obviously that wasn't their real name, but so Vanessa was like a really high flying executive within a consulting firm, and she came to me to work on her time management and where like her time was going to get spent, because she was burning the candle at both ends and all that sort of stuff. And we won all of the time. We won all of the time back through the process of working together. She still wasn't happy, and she and I said, okay, what's going on, please? And fundamentally, what we got into conversations around what really moved her about the world, and her closest relationship was with her grandmother. And I said, tell me about that. And she said, well, you know, she used to come and she was like largely the person who raised me. And the thing that has always stayed with me about my grandmother is that in the last few years of her life, no one really came to visit her, and she just sort of rotted away, in this old person's home, or in the senior citizen's home. And it made me think not only of my own grandmother, but so many grandmothers who have been wonderful to their grandkids and their kids. And it just seems wrong that people's lives finish like that. And but then she said, but anyway, look, Max, I have to go. Like I have to keep working. But listen, thanks for the coaching work. And as she was sort of walking away, I called out to her and I said, like, while you're sitting in your high flying office, there are lots of grandmothers out there just like yours who are going to die because you're not taking up this call. And she sort of looked back at me, and like it was like sort of the scene in the film, the elevator closed and all that sort of stuff. And so anyway, so she came back to me and said like, a part of me was really angry at you, but then I thought about it, and the reason why I was angry was because you were right. Like I don't want to be doing what I'm doing, and I do. And she does have all these skills, and skills around like business development, business management, team management, etc., etc. And I said, okay, so what would you like to do? And we went back and forth, and basically she said, what if I was able to open or take over a senior citizen's home, or a chain of them, whereby the company mission statement was that our mission was to have everybody who comes through our homes, who ends up passing in the end, make sure that two things. Number one is that the last 10 years of their life are the best 10 years. And then number two is that when they do pass, that they're really honestly able to pass with a smile on their face. And I said, right. And I said, what would you need to do that? And so we got into back and forth ideas about what that could look like. And so like the thing sort of ended up is she had like forgiveness classes in the senior citizens home. Like, so it's like, where were all of your regrets? What are the things that you didn't do? How could you now be at peace with that moving forward? What are the conversations that you haven't had? Who haven't you said sorry to, or asked them to say sorry to you? What are all the emotional pain points that you haven't cleared? She fed them amazing organic food. Like had like paired them up very cleverly, like with the appropriate friendship circles, not just sort of putting everyone together. Would do, like all this sort of stuff. And so like that example often seems to me by way of how people can, what would you say, re-engineer all of the gifts that she had. But the thing is, like before she was doing that, she was largely acting out of, like I said, that feeling of feeling insignificant. And so her pain moved from like trying to prove herself to the world to now just expressing herself in the world in a way that is meaningful to her. And in my view, that's a far closer approximation of success than the former.
Yeah, that's incredible. What a success story. So that do you find that to be on the more typical side or on the more extreme side of like successes that you've seen where she like completely changed trajectory and just did this other thing?
No, very, very typical. Like very typical. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the track that they're on doesn't lead anywhere good. Like it's a very displacing experience for high performers, because often what happens is the more successful they get, the more miserable they become, but the more the world rewards them. So it's this incredibly like displacing experience. And also that combined with often having strained relationships and having no one really to turn to. And so being able to create that space for them, yes, I would argue that when they really see it, it's inevitable.
Wow. That's pretty profound. I mean, if people spend however many years pursuing, their typical definition of success, and they achieve that through blood, sweat, and tears.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like Drew, like I don't anyone can sort of go on my website and see that. It's like one of the first things that I say is you are not chasing success, you are chasing completeness, and they are not the same thing.
Okay, got it. So, I mean, so you were able to dig out of this woman like a very, very specific like need that she had that she was able to fulfill. Are you able to get to that with your clients where you're like like you really find like the thing that they need to create fulfillment in their life?
Yep. I think, I think that it's life is a sort of navigation process, right? So even now, like when I talk to it, even now, that has now evolved into even better things from there. And, so the thing is an ever receding idea, but certainly by way of helping people understand the direction to go in. Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And have you seen people have, like, aside from just, greater sense of purpose and fulfillment in life, have you seen other things like maybe improvements in health and relationships and other things like that?
Yeah. Health is a really thorny one, Drew, because one of the things that I talk a lot about in the book is part of the reason why I would argue, and I'd love to, you're welcome to challenge me here, but certainly by way of what I've observed, is that part of the reason why it's difficult for people to stick to healthy habits and all that sort of stuff, it's fundamentally because they are living a life that is misaligned in some way. And so, like, one of the things that I talk a lot about by way of the book is that, like, one of the things that I say is, like, if you're here in chapter 5 and you're still thinking, oh, cool, this is like a guide to finding a more fulfilling job, like, you've missed the point, like, entirely. Like, and the reason why I say that is because no part of your life is disconnected. So, like, your mental health impacts your physical health. The fulfillment from your friendships shows up, impacts how you show up at work. Stress from work shows up in your marriage. So, like, all of these things are interconnected. And so the thing that I often think about whenever somebody starts to talk about their health is, well, healthy habits in the service of what? Like, because in my view, at least, like, we are yearning to feel connected to something bigger than just us, right? And so in that way, healthy habits in the service of nothing are going to be very short-lived. And so, addiction studies will basically tell us that addiction isn't the problem, it is the solution. And so the question becomes, what is it a solution for? And fundamentally, it's a solution for, like, all of those other things that I just mentioned. Like, whenever I'm working with, for example, like a married couple, like, I never let them see me together, because the problem is not one another. As I go, like, forget about him for a minute, or forget about her for a minute. How are you with you? And they go, oh, I'm not too good. And I go then, all right. So this isn't really about, you not being okay with you invariably will show up in these conversations with your partner, right? So, so the thing that, so I'll give you an example, right? So years and years ago, I didn't really understand what I just said to you. So I was, like, starting out and all that sort of stuff. And I worked with somebody around their health, who was the CEO. And I was largely just acting as their sort of, like, accountability buddy. They'd come and meet me once a week. They'd have to tell me what they ate and all this sort of stuff. And I have since sort of approximated that being someone's accountability buddy is rather stupid, because as soon as I go away, like, the whole infrastructure of their health or whatever it ends up being sort of falls apart. And so anyway, so I was working with this person week on week. Like, he was getting objectively progressively healthier, right? But what ended up happening was our engagement came to an end for the time being, and invariably he backslid all the way back to basically where he was when we first started working together. The next time, right, years later, we started working together again, right? But this time I'd learned, and I said, okay, so these habits, I said, tell me about your career, tell me about your marriage, tell me about your kids, tell me about all this sort of stuff. And he started to share, and I said, tell me what you really want to be doing. And the thing for him, he actually wanted to be in sustainable agriculture and, like, farm to plate food, because his son has, it might be celiac, it might be Hashimoto's or something like that. And he said, and I think about all of the other kids out there who, probably suffer the same, and I'd love to try and get that into schools. Like, that was like one thing that he wanted to do. And so anyway, so as we've been working on it, week on week, one of the things that has shown up is like a return in some ways to the conversations that we've had about his health. And I said, if you fast forward into your vision into the future, like, is there room in there for excessive drinking? Is there room in there for junk food? Is there room in there for whatever? And he went, oh no, that doesn't make sense at all. Not particularly not with what I'm trying to do. You know, and I said, right. And so like just by default, just being attached to a purpose, that he finds really meaningful, that is anchored in contribution, you know, sort of all by itself, like his health is starting to take care of itself. And so that's really what I mean around like health is like, health is great. Health in the service of health in the service of a mission, I would argue, is inevitable. Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I see in my space is I work with a lot of parents as well. And there's this sort of misunderstanding of the nobility of self-sacrifice when it comes to certain things. You know, and a lot of them, they're with me because they're overweight, they're fatigued, their energy is low, they don't have, you know, good mental clarity throughout the day, and they've let their wellness habits go, right? They're not exercising, they're not eating well, they're kind of just barely getting by. And why? Because I'm prioritizing my kids, right? This is my selfless pursuit of giving all of my time to my family so that they can have all of me, because what else can I offer them? And it's like, well, if you're offering them a version of yourself that is far below the ideal version of you, like, is that what you want to be giving them? Or are you serving them better by taking some time for yourself to improve yourself so that when you are there for them, you show up at 100%? And there's a whole mindset shift there as well. And it's just kind of reprioritizing, right? Okay, taking time for you in this way, you can, you know, if it helps you, you can say you're doing this for your family, right? And you are. By improving your own health, you're improving your mental health, your energy, and how much better do you show up for the people that rely on you?
Yep, spot on. Yeah, there's nothing that you said that I disagree with.
Yeah. So everyone has their own, I guess, individual end story, right? Their own, what we can say is their own like focal point of fulfillment that you kind of have to pull out of them. And you do this through dialogue. How long do you usually work with a customer or a client?
Generally like years at a time.
Okay.
But it's
I was going to say this is no small thing, right? I mean, building trust and building understanding.
Yeah, I mean, look, like normally, like my engagements go for a year, you know, but invariably, if I see somebody every single week for a year, I sort of start to fill a role in their life, you know, and so because I tend to fill that role, the idea around like, and I would intuit in some ways it would be similar, like with you, if you're working with somebody, I don't know how often you see your clients, let's say it's once a week, right? If you're seeing them once a week for a training session, or, you know, or even more, right? I don't know, but even is the idea around like, oh, let's stop, you know, now that we've hit a year together, you know, it often doesn't really happen. So just sort of by default, I sort of end up filling a role in somebody's life. But I think, it's a real honor, you know, like I've said that in the past elsewhere, you know, like there's no greater honor than helping somebody become a more effective version of themselves in a way that is meaningful to them.
Yeah. And what would you say are some common myths out there in the space of, you know, these people that have achieved, you know, seemingly great things that they've kind of that have created traps that they've fallen into?
Myth. That they are happy.
Okay.
That they are happy, that they are fulfilled, that they are exemplars of the highest potential of the human condition. Like they're very common, like mimetic ideas that we've inherited. That's nonsense. The high, by way of high performance, like a common myth is like high performance is a laser-like focus on results, and that's not true either. So high performance is a laser-like focus on behavior. And so like if you think about like going to the gym is like an input, being healthy is an output. And so, high performance is a laser-like focus on the inputs that are required to succeed said output rather than a focus on the output itself. Other common myths. I would bring it back to the idea that Western cultural materialist success is an example of the highest potential of a human being. I think that's absolute nonsense. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And then on the other side of that, in the coaching space, what would you say are some things that, let's just say your run-of-the-mill coach is getting wrong when people are going to coaches because, for the same reason that they would come to you, but maybe it's sort of your run-of-the-mill coach, right? They don't necessarily have your approach.
Yeah, sure. So number one is that coaches who say, I'll be your accountability partner, are normally full of it. Like, I think the challenge within like the coaching space, particularly in personal development, executive coaching, leadership coaching, et cetera, is a lot of these people are like ex-corporate burnouts who couldn't hack it in their own careers and are now trying to build a lifestyle business for themselves. And so the touch points that they'll say to their clients, all right, I'll see you once a month or once or twice a quarter or, whatever, and we'll do some work together. And I just think, you guys aren't going to get anywhere. You're not going to get anywhere. Like, I can't, like, you would understand, right? You're with what you do. It's like, I can't really help you, if I'm seeing you that infrequently, and so that would be one thing. Is like the idea of I'd be looking out for that. Like, if I was looking for a coach, I've worked with my coach for a long time, but if I was looking for a coach, that would be one of the things I'd be looking out for, is that sort of background. And then the second piece for me would be that the question that we really need to be answering is, how come you feel you need someone to hold you accountable in the first place? Like, that is a much more profound question. And so the challenge, and then the other thing that I would argue is that coaches, they don't really have like a very cohesive philosophy around how they work with people. So they use a lot of like bundled language, like, I'll help you discover your authentic self, or I'll help you actualize your potential, or I'll help you leave a legacy, or whatever. And it's just like, all these are like bundled terms that mean absolutely nothing. Like, who defines what is authentic? Who defines what a legacy is? Like, there's all of these sort of like epistemic traps. And fundamentally, it all just stems from like a lack of deep understanding of the human condition and how we actually operate. Those would be the things I'd be on the hunt for, certainly.
Got it. And curious, so you've mentioned accountability a few times now. So if you're working with a client and they're having a hard time with accountability, right? They have, takeaways or to-dos or things that they need to think about.
Yep.
And they come back for your next session a week later and they haven't done it.
Yep.
Do you train on helping someone to become accountable for themselves, or is there a point where you're just like, this isn't going to work if you're not going to do the things you need to do?
No, not at all. So okay, great question. So let's take a step back and answer this. So there's two fundamental categories of motivation. So you have extrinsic motivation, you have intrinsic motivation, right? So extrinsic is, forgive me, and listeners, please forgive me if this is super obvious to everyone. But extrinsic motivation is, I don't enjoy the task, but I'll do it because of what it gets me, right? Intrinsic motivation is, I just love doing the thing because I love doing the thing. The healthiest people are intrinsically motivated, as in fitness, health, all these sort of things. Like, the process itself is the outcome. It is the reward. It is the whatever, right? Those who are extrinsically motivated is like, I can't stand working out, but I can't stand looking in the mirror even more. So, and so those that struggle with accountability are extrinsically motivated. And what I mean by that is that they fundamentally don't enjoy whatever it is that they are having to do to get that outcome. And so there's a re-engineering of meaning around certain tasks that needs to happen.
Okay.
And there's a re-engineering of meaning. And if we can re-engineer that meaning, then the accountability sort of problem becomes moot. No longer holds any ground.
Okay. Yeah, there's definitely a psychology to that. And that's something that I'm going to have to learn more about because, as a wellness coach, that's something that I encounter all the time is it's like, okay, you come to me because these are the things that we've agreed you want to accomplish or you want to work on, or this is what we've established are your priorities. And then it's like, okay, let's create your program. And then they don't do the program.
Right. Well, I guess the question would show up for me is to ask them, why do you want these outcomes? Like, why these outcomes? And so you can listen to the sort of meta structures that are supporting those outcomes. So if they go, like, oh, I just can't stand the way I look at the moment, or I can't stand, whatever. Like I guess the danger that I, again, don't want to speak into your space, but I would intuit in some ways that the danger is that, as soon as you achieve those outcomes, your motivation probably dies with it because you were negatively motivated to get out of pain. And then when we take the pain away, that motivation sort of dies along with that pain. And so, it's a, what would you say? It's a re-engineering of meaning so that we can effectively move towards what we do want rather than what we don't want.
Yeah. And maybe I'm a bit of a snob, but I generally don't work with people where I can't get like some sort of meaning behind what they want to accomplish that isn't just kind of superficial surface level. Like if their only goal is to look good in a swimsuit, like that's not really what I do anymore. I've moved away from that. So yeah, there's got to be more to it than that. So I do look for those deeper motivations, and I've found that with people with a spouse and with kids and with their own like tribe that relies on them, it's a bit easier for them to create that sort of self-motivation and that accountability, right? But for people that don't have that, they still deserve the help and they still deserve to be able to be ushered along this journey. But for me personally, it's harder to find those motivations for accountability.
It's harder for you to work with those people. Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Harder for me to, so if let's say I have someone, they're single, they're not really part of a big social group, they don't have kids, they don't look good, they don't feel good, they want to improve these things, right? They want to improve their wellness, but they're not necessarily doing it because they want to get to a point of contribution, right? It's still kind of just about them. For those people, it's a little bit harder for me to create accountability when that accountability isn't there. So when they're not doing the things that we're agreeing that they need to do, it's a little bit harder for me to get to a point of helping them to reprioritize, we'll say.
Can I ask why you don't, what in your experience tells you the reason that they don't do them? Why do you think they don't do them?
That's a good question. I mean, at a service level, because they're hard, right? And hard is purely perspective, right? Like it's okay. Don't eat first thing in the morning when you wake up, even though you're used to doing that. I want you to move your body first thing in the morning instead of eating. I want you to drink this much water every day. Like, oh, it's hard to drink that much water. It's hard to not eat when I first wake up. It's hard to do these things.
Right.
So there's this sort of this perception of hardship and challenge that sometimes people, they don't want to do that, even though they can. And it's hard to get them from don't want to can.
Right.
Yeah. So those are some of the challenges that I face as a coach. And my stuff is definitely, I would say on like the simpler scale of things as compared to what you're doing. I mean, you're really doing some long-term life altering stuff. And so that's why I asked that question about accountability, because it's something that comes up for me pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you have a method to work through that.
Yeah. I mean, I would, certainly by way of help, you run circles around me in that conversation. I think the thing that shows up for me is that, again, I come back to this thing of whatever someone brings to the work is not the problem. It's like the symptom of something deeper. And so I guess the question that I would be interested in answering personally by way of the health conversation is, how come this isn't just like super easy for you? Like, why is it that this is a struggle? Like the healthiest people, certainly that I know, they don't have to wit themselves to be healthy. They just are that. They are healthy. It's part of who they are. And so invariably, if I ask that question, how come this is difficult for you? What they'll point to is something else. They'll say, oh, well, I'm really, really stressed and I'm really, overworked. And it's like, okay. Well, if you weren't overworked and you weren't overstressed, do you think this would be a problem for you? And invariably they might say, well, maybe not as much. So like I'm trying to trace, and I go, well, how come you're overworked? And they'll say, well, my boss is a bit of a taskmaster, and it's been really challenging these days. And I go, right, and have you been able to set better boundaries? And they go, oh, no, I couldn't do that. I go, oh, okay, right. So and how come you couldn't set better boundaries? And at some stage it'll terminate somewhere, and they'll go, just because I don't know, I just can't. I go, okay. So maybe the conversation that we need to have is about how to set better boundaries around you having a little bit more balance in your own life. So then that way you can actually pay attention to your health in the first place. So like I'm trying to trace like where something terminates, because then we're actually dealing with the problem, rather than, there's like this wonderful example. I can't remember. I actually think it's in a Tony Robbins documentary on Netflix called I'm Not Your Guru. And this young woman sort of gets up and talks about the fact that she has unhealthy eating cycles. And like the first question out of Tony Robbins' mouth is like, tell me about your relationship with your dad. And it's just like, I just think that there's something very wise about that. It's like, let's actually get to the thing that we need to be talking about,
Okay. All right. Now you've got me kind of, now I'm kind of, I want to have one of these conversations now. I dig this idea of just keep going and going until you can't go anymore, right? Until you find the thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, so again, like you're sort of tracing, and that's like, I would argue in some ways that's what really good, like doctors do, really good people in like really good naturopaths do, like that's the thing that they're trying to track, it's like, okay, fine, you've turned up here because you're sick, but like, why are you sick? And then if we actually solve, like I'll still give you painkillers or whatever for the symptoms, but let's actually try and work out what's making you sick in the first place. And if we can solve for that, then you don't need me at all. That's sort of the thing that shows up for me.
Yeah, it seems like there's a high degree of deconditioning that has to be done here.
Yes, that's exactly right.
People are conditioned for all kinds of things that are really unproductive.
Mm. Yep, I agree.
Yep. Well, cool. Max, this has been a really fun conversation. Your book is coming out June 1st, right?
Yeah, pre-sales. Yeah, that's right.
Pre-sale. Okay. So by the time this podcast is released, the pre-sale should be available. So I will link to it in the show notes. So folks, you can get the show notes here at the superhumanblueprintpodcast.com. You can find Max at maxstevenscoaching.com, and I'll link to that as well as the book in the show notes for today's episode. Max, thank you for the chat. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you having me.